The road was barely a road anymore. Just two fading ruts carved into the soft, moss-eaten ground, flanked by skeletal birches that leaned toward one another like conspirators whispering above. Belmore Road had once connected the village of Eothen to the rest of the world, before the new highway was built 20 years back, and time had done its best to erase it since. Now it was little more than a shadow, an overgrown memory, snaking into the forest like a question mark that no one had the courage to answer. Harriet Cole had not intended to take this path. She'd been driving since early morning, escaping the static din of the city and her small, suffocating flat in search of silence. The radio hadn't worked in hours. The dashboard clock blinked a perpetual 3 o'clock, and her phone had long ago gone dark, the screen refusing to acknowledge her touch. A wrong turn, perhaps more than one, had brought her here, and then the fog began. It didn't descend like mist or drift in from the marshes. It was sudden and complete, like a curtain falling. One moment she was squinting at road signs and sunlit trees. The next, the world had been swallowed in a thick, colorless shroud. She slowed her car to a crawl, the tires crunching gravel that had no right to be there, and stared ahead. Shapes moved within the fog. Not figures exactly, but ripples, like something pacing just beyond clarity. Then the engine died. It didn't sputter or cough or give her any warning. It simply stopped. The dashboard lights winked out. The steering wheel locked. A heavy stillness wrapped around her like wool, too thick to shake off. For a long time, Harriet sat in the driver's seat, hands folded in her lap, listening to the hush. No birds, no breeze. Just a faint creak of her car cooling, and the soft sigh of fog brushing against metal and glass. She tried the ignition. Nothing. She tried her phone again. Still dead. And yet she didn't panic. Not exactly. It was more like a mild disquiet, as if she'd stepped into a dream she didn't quite remember falling into. That sense of unreality, the stillness, the smothered light, kept her calm, or numb. Or maybe that was a fog's doing. Eventually, she stepped out. The air was damp and oddly warm, despite the late October date. Leaves carpeted the road in slick layers of copper and brown, muffling her steps as she circled the car. The headlights were useless now, yellowed orbs glowing faintly into the nothingness. When she looked behind her, the road she'd come from had vanished. Only fog remained. But ahead there was something, a shape, broad and low, rising out of the mist with angles that didn't quite align. A house. She shouldn't have walked toward it. Not really. Every part of her had urged her to stay put, to wait for the fog to lift, to turn back once she could see the road again. But Harriet had always had a quiet defiance to her, a trait that made her bristle when told what she should do. So she walked forward, step by slow step, as the house swam into view. It was old. That was the first thing she noticed. Not just age, but worn down, as if time had passed through it instead of around it. A sloping roof, half-rotted porch. Wooden siding gone gray with weather. Its windows were dark and blank, though one near the top glinted faintly, like it had been cleaned recently. The door hung slightly ajar, crooked on rusted hinges. She stood at the edge of the porch for a long time. Then, without fully deciding to, she stepped up onto the wood. It groaned beneath her weight, not in protest, but more like acknowledgement, as if it had been waiting for her. She peered into the house through the crack in the door. The inside was shadowed, but not entirely dark. The fog had crept in, clinging to floor like a low tide, swirling around the legs of a high-back chair and an empty coat rack. Dust floated in the air, thick as snow, and the scent of cedar and mold mingled faintly in her nose. Still, she hesitated. Something about the house felt familiar, not in a deja vu kind of way, but as though it knew her, as though it had always known her. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The latch clicked softly behind her, and the fog outside grew thicker. The door closed behind Harry with a sound of finality, not a slam, not a creak, just a low, uncertain click, like the last word in the sentence. She turned quickly, instinctively grasping for the doorknob, but the brass was cold and unyielding in her hand. Locked. No twist, no give. She tried again, harder this time, but the result was the same. The latch refused to budge. Still, she didn't panic. That sense of sleepwalking through the moment remained. Her heartbeat didn't speed, and her breath came slow, measured, as though her body understood something she did not. A house lost in fog, a dead car, a locked door. These things should have frightened her, but they didn't. Not yet. The hallway before her stretched longer than seemed possible, cloaked in a soft sepia haze, as if the very air held memory. The walls were lined with faded floral wallpaper, curling slightly at the seams, and the floorboards were warped in a gentle bow, as though the house itself had settled tiredly into the earth. There were no photographs on the walls, no paintings or mirrors, but the hallway still felt watched, as if the space itself remembered who had passed through. Harriet took a slow step forward. The fog had followed her in, trailing at her ankles like a pet. It never rose above her calves, never thickened. Just drifted along the floor like it had always belonged there. She paused before a doorway on her left. The door itself was missing, and beyond it, a sitting room revealed itself in dim, dusty hues. She stepped inside. The room was wider than it appeared from the hall, lined with tall bookcases stuffed with crooked, yellowing volumes. Their spines bore no titles. Not worn away, just absent. A grandfather clock stood mute in the far corner. Its hand stopped at midnight, or noon. It was impossible to tell which. A threadbare rug sprawled beneath her feet, its original colors obscured by years of neglect. And in the center of the room, beneath a slanted window that looked out onto the colorless fog, sat a lamp on a low table. It was a delicate thing, porcelain hand-painted, perhaps once white, but now aged to the color of bone. A pull chain dangled from beneath its yellowed shade. Harry approached it, drawn for reasons she couldn't explain. She reached out and tugged the chain. Nothing, no spark of life, no flicker of light. But as soon as her fingers left the chain, a hum began, low, almost imperceptible, not mechanical, organic, like a distant voice singing behind a wall. She froze, straining to hear more clearly, but it stopped just as quickly as it began. She looked around. The air in the room had shifted. It wasn't colder exactly, but it felt more present, heavier somehow. A book lay open on a side table nearby. She hadn't noticed it before. Its pages were blank, save for a single line scrawled across the middle in faded ink. You've always known the way back. She frowned. That phrase, it stirred something, an echo of something said long ago, maybe in a dream or a place half remembered. She closed the book gently and glanced toward the hallway again. It had changed. Where once it stretched ahead in a simple line, it now forked to the left and right. Both passages were dimly lit by flickering sconces on the wall. Oil lamps, it seemed, not electric. The wallpaper shifted in pattern here. On the left, a dense thicket of vines in looping silver. On the right, a pattern of thin, vertical lines that moved slightly as she looked at them too long, like they were breathing. She did not remember there being a fork before, but then again, she couldn't be sure. A soft knock came from behind her. She turned sharply. Nothing. The room behind her was just as it had been. Still, silent. The fog pooling deeper in corners. The lamp remained unlit. Then another knock, this time from the hallway ahead. Harriet felt her mouth go dry. She walked slowly back toward the fork. The knock came again. Not loud, not forceful, just patient, as though whatever made it could afford to wait. She stood at the crossroads between the two halls. Left or right, neither felt correct. Or rather, they both felt too correct, as though each one had been designed specifically for her. The knock came once more, this time closer, no longer patient, more insistent. She turned toward the hallway on the left, the one with the silver vines, and stepped into it. The air grew thicker here. The sconces burned with a soft greenish flame that cast trembling shadows along the floor. The wallpaper's vines seemed to climb higher the further she walked, growing denser, wrapping around doorways and curling across the ceiling. Each door she passed was closed, but not locked. Some were open a crack. She did not look inside until she came to the last door. It stood wider than the others, with a polished handle that gleamed strangely in the lamplight. No dust on this one. No vines. The knock came again once as she stood before it, and then silence. She reached for the handle. Inside, the room was almost empty. A narrow bed, a single chair, a desk with a candle that had burned down to stub. The window was open, letting in a breeze that didn't belong in a house, so sealed and buried in fog. On the bed lay a single item, her scarf, the same one she'd lost 2 winters ago on the train to Black Hill, never to be seen again. She picked it up slowly, fingers trembling now. The first hint of something cracking through the numb dream she'd been walking in. The wool was unmistakably hers. She'd knitted it herself. There even was the uneven patch near the end, where she'd run out of red yarn and switched to gray. But how had it come to be here? She turned around quickly, and something moved just outside the door. Not footsteps, not breath, just a shape of presence, receding down the hall. She didn't call out. She didn't chase. Instead, she sat on the edge of the bed, holding the scarf in her lap. Outside the window, the fog shifted, briefly parting to reveal the silhouette of another house in the distance, exactly the same as the one she was in. And behind her, just barely audible, almost a whisper, came a voice that said, "Now you remember." She did not sleep on the bed. She thought about it. After all, it had the quiet and used stillness of something made up for her arrival. But the thought of lying down in that room, with the fog tapping at the windows and the weight of the scarf in her lap, felt too much like surrender. Instead, she sat for a long time, staring at the candle nub on the desk, thinking about the voice. Now you remember. But she didn't. Not yet. She rose again, slow and stiff, and crossed the room to the window. The fog beyond had thickened again, sealing up the glimpse she'd had of the twin house across the way. There was no view, no path, only swirling gray that pressed softly against the glass. She reached out and pulled the window shut. The latch clicked with a sound that echoed strangely in the tiny room. Then something underfoot caught her attention. Not a sound exactly, more shift, a subtle pressure, a softness in the floorboard beneath her left boot. She stepped back, then again deliberately. There, it gave just a little. She knelt, brushing the scarf off her shoulders, and felt along the grain of the wood. At the base of the desk, hidden just beneath its carved leg, was a thin notch. Carefully, she pried at it with her fingers until a trapdoor creaked open, exhaling a breath of air from somewhere far colder than the house above. A cellar. The steps were steep and narrow, made of the same gray-black timber as the house, but covered in a fine silt of dust and something else. Ash, maybe, or old soil. Harriet hesitated only a moment before descending. The air grew dry and chill as she went, the silence pressing like cloth around her ears. At the bottom, the cellar widened into a shallow, unfinished space. Low beams ran across the ceiling. The walls were dirt, held in place by sagging wooden braces and lined with rusted nails. Along the far wall sat 3 crates, unmarked, stacked unevenly, their lids loose. And the fog had followed her here, too. It slithered down the steps behind her like water finding a drain, pooling low, weaving around the crates. She crouched beside them. The first crate was filled with bones. Not human, not animal, something in between, smooth like driftwood, hollow in places. They clicked softly against each other when she touched them, the way seashells do. The second crate held clothing, but none of it was hers. Coats, gloves, scarves, a child's boot, small things, left things, things long discarded, all with the same dusty and used feel of museum relics. On top of the pile lay a photograph. She pulled it out slowly, black and white, faded around the edges. 5 people stood in a row before the very house she now stood beneath. Though the siding was cleaner, the porch more upright. A man and woman, 3 children. Their faces were indistinct, overexposed. No eyes, just blank ovals where expression should be, written on the back, in the same curling ink as the book upstairs. All roads lead inward. The last crate was empty, but beside it, almost hidden in the fog, was a door. Small, no more than 4 feet tall, made of rough planks and closed with a latch of bent iron. It didn't look like it belonged here. The walls around it were firmer, smoother, as though this section's cellar had been reinforced. The fog pressed against it, seeping through the crack beneath. She stared at the door for a long time. She should have gone back upstairs. Should have shut the trap door, left the room, walked out of the house and back into the trees. But she did not. Instead, Harriet reached for the latch. It opened without resistance. Beyond it lay a tunnel, earthen, low ceiling, with old support beams spaced every few feet. The fog filled it like a river. It stretched forward into the dark, curving gently to the right, where a faint greenish light flickered intermittently. And there, far ahead, she heard it again. That voice, further now. She ducked inside. The tunnel walls were cool and slightly damp. Her fingers brushed against root and stone as she walked, and once or twice she felt vibration beneath the earth, like something turning slowly in its sleep. The light ahead wavered and pulsed, growing brighter, then dimmer, never constant. She passed doorways, not real ones, just holes in the tunnel walls, opening onto small alcoves carved from the dirt. Each one was different. In the first, a dining table, set for one, with a plate of blackened food and a chair turned away from her. In the second, a bathtub, old and claw-footed, filled with dark water, no reflection on its surface. In the third, a mirror, framed in iron, impossibly clean. She saw herself in it, standing there, pale and alert, scarf wrapped tight around her neck. But behind her, the tunnel was gone, only a staircase leading upward. She turned quickly. No stairs, only the tunnel winding forward. She pressed on. At last, the tunnel opened into a wide chamber with stone floor and high beams crisscrossing the ceiling. The green light came from a lantern mounted on the far wall, casting long, broken shadows. And there, in the center of the room, stood another door, full size this time, made of thick oak, heavy iron bands. No handle, just a keyhole shaped like an eye, and a key. It lay in a glass dish atop a pedestal, no more than a few paces away. Harriet approached, reaching for it, but something moved. A scraping sound, soft but deliberate, came from a far corner of the room. Not footsteps, not speech, but movement. She turned slowly, eyes adjusting to shadows, and in the gloom, she saw it, a figure, sitting perfectly still in a wooden chair, facing the wall, wrapped in rags, head low, hands resting on the arms of the chair, long fingers curled slightly inward. No breath, no sign of life, but not dead, not entirely. She took the key. The figure did not stir. She walked to the door, fitted the key into the lock. The mechanism turned easily, with a soft series of clicks. The door swung open. Beyond it, another staircase, spiraling upward, and from above, the faint sound of a music box began to play. Slow, broken, familiar. She stepped through the door and began to climb. The figure behind her turned its head, just slightly, and the fog followed. The spiral staircase wound upward far longer than Harriet thought possible. She climbed in silence, hand grazing the cold iron railing as she ascended. The sound of the music box ticking somewhere above. Each step creaked gently, as though acknowledging her passage. And with every turn the air grew thinner, tighter, as though the house itself was squeezing close around the stairs. She never looked down. After what felt like hours, what could have been minutes or days, the staircase ended in a small, square platform. A single door faced her, made of pale wood, warped slightly at the bottom as though it had once been waterlogged. A rusted hook hung loosely from one side of the frame, swinging faintly despite the stillness. The music box was louder here. She pressed her ear to the door and heard it clearly now, a familiar tune, one she hadn't heard in years, no, decades, a lullaby, one her grandmother had sung to her when Harry was very small, in a rocking chair that creaked just like these stairs, in a room with yellow curtains that fluttered even when the window was closed. But that room had burned. She was sure of it. The fire had taken the whole house. There had been no survivors, except her. She remembered the smell of smoke in her hair for weeks, the way her fingers blistered from pulling at a locked window, the sound of her grandmother's voice singing even after everything was gone. She hadn't remembered that until now. Her hand was already on the door before she realized. It opened easily, The attic was larger than it should have been, much larger. It stretched out in all directions, filled with a muted gray light that had no source. The air here was dry, still and oddly warm. Dust hung suspended like motes of ash, and the wooden floorboards groaned quietly with each of her steps. Along the walls stood dozens of furniture pieces covered in white sheets, like forgotten ghosts waiting for their names. But in the very center of the room, perfectly lit by nothing at all, sat a small table. Upon it, the music box. It was shaped like a house, not a figurine of one, but a perfect replica, small and intricately carved, with tiny windows, a slanted roof, and a brass hinge on the front door. Harry approached slowly. The lullaby was still playing, the gears ticking gently within. She reached for the lid. As her fingers touched the edge, the music stopped. The silence that followed was immense. Then, slowly, the front door of the miniature house creaked open. She did not touch it. It opened on its own. Inside was a spiral staircase, just like the one she climbed. And on the bottom stair, no taller than her thumbnail, stood a figure carved in delicate detail. A woman, pale, dark hair, wrapped in a scarf. Looking up, Harriet drew back. The music box clicked once and then began playing again, a single note at a time, slightly warped. Behind her, something shifted under the sheets. A slow settling, a drag of cloth, the sound of something standing up. She turned, breath caught in her throat. The shape beneath the nearest sheet had changed. It was taller now, more upright. The fabric sagged where it had a moment ago, drawn against the sharp suggestion of limbs beneath. It didn't move, but it didn't need to. Harriet could feel it watching her, not with eyes, but with memory, recognition. She took a step back. The floor sighed beneath her. Another sheet, further down the attic, slid to the floor with a soft whisper. Nothing stood beneath it, only a long, narrow mirror with a frame of scorched wood. She approached it slowly. Her reflection looked back at her, but it was wrong, off. The woman in the mirror wore the same clothes, the same scarf, but her expression was different, hollow-eyed, tired, and behind her, the room in the reflection was not the attic at all. It was the hallway with the silver vines. Harriet reached out to touch the glass. Her fingers did not meet cold surface. They passed through, like water, like smoke. She stepped full before her mind could catch up, before fear could do more than whisper, and the attic vanished behind her like mist and sunlight. Now she stood once again in the hallway, but it was not the same. The silver vines on the wallpaper had spread, grown thicker, crawling now across the ceiling and down the floorboards. The sconces no longer burned green, but a dull orange, flickering fitfully, and the hallway, previously straight, now curved ever so slightly, as though the house had turned on itself while she was away. Something was different inside her, too. A weight had settled in her chest. Not fear, not quite, more like inevitability, as though the house had always been waiting for her to come back to this hall, to this moment. She walked. Doors lined the corridor again. Closed. Identical. Too many. More than before. She passed one, then another, and paused at the third. It had no handle, only a keyhole shaped like a spiral. From within, she could hear the soft rustle of paper, the scratch of a quill, a breath being held. Then, faintly, a voice, not whispering this time, but speaking clearly with calm familiarity. Write it down before you forget again. The door creaked, unbidden, and opened. The room was a study. A tall desk stood near the window, lit by a lamp that should not have worked but did, burning steady and golden. Papers were scattered across the surface, filled with handwriting Harriet recognized but could not place. Diagrams of staircases, maps of houses drawn in ink and pencil. The name, Ethan, circled repeatedly. One page bore a title, The House at Elder Hollow, and beneath it, in small, trembling script, she will return by fog or by flame. Harriet sat down in the chair. The quill was warm in her hand. She did not remember dipping it, but the ink was fresh, already waiting, and as her hand moved, first slowly, then faster, she began to write everything: the fog, the car, the room, The scarf, the cellar, the figure in the chair, the spiral staircase, the music box. Each word felt like a release, like something escaping, something that had waited to be remembered. The page filled, then another and another. The voice in the walls whispered encouragement, soft but firm, guiding, reassuring. The study grew warmer. The fog outside thickened, and still she wrote, until at last, the final words came without resistance. Now she remembers. The ink dried, the lamp flickered, and behind her, the silver vines crept across the walls. The ink shimmered faintly on the last page, the strange pearlescent sheen catching in the lamplight. Harriet watched it settle, the words sinking into the paper like water into soil, absorbed completely. The quill in her hand felt heavier now, as if it had drawn something from her, something she hadn't known she could give. She set it down gently. The study fell silent. No more whispering, no movement. Even the fog outside the window had stopped swirling, frozen mid-motion like a still frame in a film reel. But that silence did not comfort her. It pressed too tightly against her ears. It made the house feel like it was holding its breath. She rose slowly. The door behind her remained open, and the hallway was just as she had left it, twisting gently, lined with doors, the vines crawling across walls and floorboards, thicker now, more alive. She walked back into the corridor, each step accompanied by a soft creak and the faint echo of her name. Harriet, not spoken, not shouted, but layered into the air like static, carried on the stillness, carved into boards. She passed 4 more doors before one swung open without her touching it. The room beyond was lit by a flickering candle mounted on the wall. Unlike the others, this room looked lived in, faint indentations on the bed, a cup still steaming faintly on the table, a book face down in the chair. The candlelight danced across the wallpaper, which here bore no vine, but instead a repeating motif. A black key on a white background, repeating endlessly like a stutter in thought. Harriet entered slowly. The door shut behind her. She didn't check it, didn't try to leave. She crossed instead the chair and turned the book over. No title, no author, only blank pages, save for one line near the middle. Each guest leaves a piece of the house behind. She looked up. The mirror above the fireplace showed not the room, but another, longer, colder, lit by swinging light bulbs that flickered just enough to make you question whether it had ever been on. She could see cots lining the floor, each made up neatly, tightly, too precisely to have been done by hand. At the far end of the mirrored room sat a man. He was hunched over, face obscured by a mass of twisted, lacquered wood. His hands were folded in his lap. One foot tapped gently against the floorboards in a slow rhythm. Tap, pause, tap, tap, pause. She turned from the mirror. The room behind her was no longer lit by candlelight. Instead, the glow now came from the wall itself. The wallpaper pulsed softly, dimly, and the black keys shimmered with it. The bed had changed as well. Now perfectly made, flat as a coffin lid, with no cup, no steam, no book in sight. But in the chair, a figure sat where she had just been, not moving, not breathing, wrapped in a dark scarf and staring at the fireplace. She did not scream. It looked exactly like her, but drained, hollowed, not aged, but used, like a garment worn too many times and hung to dry in a forgotten closet. The reflection in the mirror behind her showed her double clearly. Still, watching, the figure blinked. Harriet backed away, slowly, toward the door. The wallpaper pulsed more rapidly now. The black keys overlapping, multiplying, crawling down the wood, peeling up floorboards. She reached the door but found not a handle, but a keyhole shaped like a mouth. Lips curled delicately around a round void, as if the wall itself expected something. She reached into her coat pocket without thinking. The key was there. She hadn't put it there. It was small, cold. The metal was etched with tiny words too small to read, and it pulsed in her palm like a heartbeat. She slid it into the mouth. The wall swallowed it. There was a sound, low, grinding, old with being pushed open after years of rotten silence. The room bent slightly to the left. The mirror cracked. Her reflection flickered. And then the door opened. She stepped out into a hallway she hadn't seen before. Longer, narrower, no sconces here, only doors. Door after door after door, each marked with number carved in rough, uneven slashes. Some doors had scratches, some had locks. One had a deep gouge from the ceiling to floor, as though something had clawed its way inside, or tried to claw out. She walked. The silence here was louder, a ringing sort of emptiness, as though the house had gone deaf. From behind one door came the sound of breathing, wet, labored, too slow. Another door rattled softly, rhythmically, as if someone inside rocked back and forth against it. A third had no sound, but its doorknob was slick with something thick and black. She passed them all, until she reached door 12. It was slightly ajar. Harriet pushed it open gently, and the hinges gave a tired moan of protest. The room inside was impossibly cold, breath-fogging cold, the kind that settled in marrow and memory. A single bed lay in the center, and on that bed was a girl, no more than 8, curled up, clutching a stuffed box. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow but steady. Harriet stepped closer. The girl looked like someone she knew. Not quite herself, but close. The nose, the shape of the hands, a curve to the hairline, a version of her, perhaps, or a fragment, or something left behind long ago and now waiting to be found. A note rested on the pillow. Keep her asleep, or she'll remember to. And for the first time since entering the house, Harriet felt fear settle fully in her bones. She turned away from the bed, back toward the hallway, and found the door had closed again. No keyhole, no handle, just a blank wall. But she was no longer alone in the room. The stuffed box in the girl's arms had turned its head, just slightly, enough to reveal one glassy eye staring directly at her. Then it blinked. Harriet did not scream. Screaming felt too sudden, too abrupt for this place. Instead, she backed slowly away from the bed, her eyes locked on the fox's unblinking glassy eye, which now tracked her, shifting imperceptibly with her every movement. The stuffed animal didn't speak. It didn't move again, but the pressure of its attention pressed against her skin like static before a storm. The girl slept on, curled tightly, arms locked around the fox. Her breathing never changed, but the room began to thrum. Soft at first, almost like a heartbeat under the floorboards. It wasn't a sound. It was felt, a slow reverberation that began in Harriet's heels and climbed up her spine, humming behind her teeth. The candle on the wall flickered without flame, casting shadows that didn't belong to her. She stepped backward again and reached for the wall where the door had been. Smooth, no seam, no crack, just cold plaster, breathing faintly. She turned in a slow circle. The room had changed again. The ceiling was taller now, too tall, disappearing into shadow. The walls were further apart. Yet the bed remained exactly where it had always been, tiny and vulnerable at the center of the widening room. And behind the bed, stretching across the far wall, was a single, impossibly long window. Harriet hadn't seen it before, but it had always been there. She approached it cautiously. The glass was old, wavy in its texture, distorting the world beyond. She wiped a hand across it and peered through. What she saw was not outside. There was no outside. The view showed another room, narrow, lined with cots. People lay on them, dozens, wrapped in threadbare blankets, all asleep, some muttering, some twitching, all familiar. She pressed her forehead to the glass and saw herself in one of the cots. Not a child, not old, just asleep like the rest of them, face slack, mouth slightly open. In the cot beside her lay the girl from this room. The same curl of hair across her brow, the same fox pressed to her chest. This was not a window. It was a mirror, or a painting, or a memory. Then, slowly, the Harriet in the cot turned her head, not a twitch, a slow, deliberate motion. The eyes opened and looked at her, directly, not through the glass. At her, Harriet recoiled, stumbling back from the window. The image held. The eyes in the reflection remained open, watching, unblinking. Then the figure in the cot reached up, sluggishly, like someone struggling through water, and tapped one finger against the glass. Tap. The window trembled. A hairline crack snaked across it. The girl in the bed behind Harriet stirred. Letting out a small sigh in her sleep, the fox nestled deeper against her chest, its stitched smile curling just slightly upward. Harriet turned. Her breath had gone thin, her mouth dry. There was no door, but there was a seam now, at the base of the window. She crouched and ran her hand along it, fingers finding a groove, just wide enough to fit her fingers into. She hesitated, then pulled. A panel opened. Not a door, exactly, more like a crawl space. Behind it, darkness, and stairs. Always the stairs. Down this time. She paused at the edge, then turned to glance once more at the long window. Her reflection in the cot had closed its eyes again. The girl in the bed slept on. The fox stared. Harriet entered the crawl space. The passage was tight and low. She moved on hands and knees, the wooden floor warm beneath her palms, the walls so close they brushed her shoulders. She didn't know how long she crawled. The light faded behind her, and the dark ahead remained the same, deep and unyielding. But eventually, the air changed. It grew colder again, sharper, as though she'd passed through a membrane, and then the floor ended. She reached out and found open space. Cautiously, she swung her legs down and lowered herself until her feet touched a solid surface. She stood. She was in a hallway, but this one was different. It was perfect, uncomfortably so. The walls were smooth and painted a pale blue. Clean white trim lined the baseboards. Small frame paintings hung in precise intervals. Boats, flowers, children in old-fashioned clothes. There were no vines here, no fog, no dust. The lights overhead were modern and bright, humming softly. She walked forward slowly. Each step echoed. She passed a mirror and saw herself again, older now, paler, her scarf threadbare, a smear of dust along one cheek. Her eyes looked wrong, hollow, maybe, or blurred. She passed another painting. It depicted a house, not the one she had entered, not Elder Hollow, but another house, tall, black, standing at the edge of a marsh, its reflection shimmering in brackish water. A single window lit on the top floor. Then she passed another. This time, the painting showed this hallway, exactly as it looked now. Even her reflection in the mirror. Even her. She moved quickly after that. At the end of the hallway stood a pair of white double doors, each with gold knobs and a thin strip of frosted glass. The words guest registration were etched into the glass in backward cursive. She reached for the knob. A buzzer sounded. Loud, artificial, disconnected from everything else in the house. The doors clicked and swung inward. The room beyond was a lobby, carpeted, clean, walls lined with file cabinets and clipboards. A desk sat at the far end, behind which stood a man in a gray uniform and a face she could not remember but had always known. He did not smile. "Welcome," he said. "Name." She opened her mouth. Nothing came. He tilted his head, expecting. She swallowed and said, "Harriet." "Full name?" She paused, then whispered, "Harriet E. Cole." The man nodded slowly. "Room 12, he said, and slid a clipboard across the desk toward her. Signed to confirm. She leaned over it. The paper was blank, except for the last line, which was already signed, in her handwriting. Harriet E. Cole. Below it, a timestamp. 3 o'clock. The man turned the clipboard back around. "You've been with us longer than you think," he said. Behind him, a door opened, and the fog rolled in again. The fog returned as if it had been waiting just beyond the door, coiled and patient. It slid past the man at the desk without disturbing the papers, pouring across the floor in a steady sheet. Harriet stepped backward instinctively, but the fog curled around her boots and ankles with a strange familiarity. A soft sigh passed through it, as if it recognized her. The man behind the desk did not react. He looked past her now, eyes unfocused, voice quiet. "She's back on the list." Then he was gone, not vanished, just no longer there. The desk remained, the file cabinets, the hum of the ceiling light. But the man had never stood there. Not recently. Not in any real way. Harriet turned toward the open door. It yawned before her like a mouth made of lightless wood and slow breath. She didn't look back. She stepped through. The next space was a hallway, but unlike the others, it had no edges. Its walls were soft, not quite solid, like thick curtains strung too tightly to move. The ceiling curved into walls with no seam, no corner, like the inside of a long, pale cocoon. The floor was carpeted in a dull, sea moss green, damp beneath her feet. The air smelled of lavender and rust. She walked. The hall pulsed subtly as she moved, like lungs expanding and deflating. The sense of direction was loose here. Left and right bled into one another. The ceiling bowed lower. Her footsteps made no sound. She passed lights built into the walls. Each was round and dim, covered by a cloudy lens that gave off just enough glow to illuminate a few feet ahead, but not enough to show where she was going. Every fifth light buzzed quietly, the only real sound left in the world. And then came the doors. They were narrower now, tall, rounded at the top. Each one set into a wall like an alcove, numbered with black plaques, the font thin and elongated. She passed room 14, room 13, room 12 again. She paused. There was no mistaking it. Room 12. Same plaque, same worn brass knob, same door she had seen before. But hadn't she already left it? The number pulsed slightly as she looked at it. Once, like a held breath, she kept walking. Room 11, room 10, room 12 again. This time the door was open. The inside was dark. She leaned in, expecting the cold, the child, the fox. But the room was empty. Not barren. Empty, like it hadn't been built yet. Walls barely held together. Lightless space stitched into place by something that wasn't finished deciding what it wanted to be. She pulled back, closed the door gently. Room 9, room 8, room 12. Harriet stopped. Something had unraveled here. The numbers didn't matter anymore, or the doors. She turned in place, and the hallway curved gently in all directions. The lights above flickered, and from one of the closed doors, she didn't know which, a knock came. 3 times. Steady, gentle, familiar. She took a step forward. Another knock. Closer now. Not threatening. More like an invitation. Then a voice. It came not from the door, but from the space between lights. A girl's voice. Soft. Sleepy. You shouldn't have come this far. Harriet froze. The voice was hers. Younger. 12, maybe less. And beneath the words, something else moved in the sound, like wind behind words. Echoes. Familiarity turned inside out. She turned again. Now all the doors were open, and from within each, a room unfurled. Not the rooms of his house, but rooms from her life. Her real life. A kitchen yellow lit, with broken tile and a crooked table. A bedroom from college. Mattress on the floor. String lights drooping over cracked posters. The fluorescent cold of the hospital waiting room. The night her mother died. And one door at the end of the hall. A black frame. No number. She walked to it. This room was full of mirrors. Ceiling to floor, wall to wall. Every angle reflected. Every step repeated. But none of the reflections matched. Not exactly. In one, she was smiling. In another, crying. In a third, she stood wearing a nurse's uniform, holding a name tag that read someone else's name. Some mirrors were broken. Some were fogged. One was missing entirely. Just a black gap that swallowed her gaze. She stepped toward it, and from that space, her own voice came again, older this time. I told you not to remember. Harriet turned. The room was gone. She was now standing on a staircase, wooden, unfinished, no rails. Beneath her, nothing. Above her, a single attic door cracked open. Light leaked from it in long, golden strips. She climbed. Each step was harder than the last, as if the air grew denser. Her scarf pulled tight around her neck. She couldn't breathe, but she didn't stop. At the top, she reached the door and pulled it open. The attic waited for her, but not the same attic as before. This one was full of beds, cots lined in neat rows, faces on each, asleep, silent. The sound of breath filled the space in long, rising waves. She moved between them. They all looked familiar. She reached one in the center and gasped. It was her. Again, this time older, hair gray, a book clutched in her hands. The same one from the study. Her eyes were open, not blinking, just watching. Harriet reached out. The figure in the cot smiled faintly, then whispered, "You're almost home." And the light in the attic flickered once, then went out. Harriet did not scream. She had stopped screaming somewhere back on the spiral staircase, or perhaps in the crawl space. Maybe when she saw the fox blink. There was no room for panic here. Not in this place where space turned inward and time lay down like dust. Instead, she stood in the dark attic, blind, her hand half lifted. The echo of her older self's words still twisting like smoke through the black. "You're almost home." Almost. The cots were still there. She could feel their presence in the dark. Rows and rows of them. Full of breath, full of weight, full of watchers pretending to sleep. She didn't move at first. She only listened. And beneath the silence, something breathed. Not the people. The house. It was deep and slow, the way trees might breathe if they could, or mountains. The floor shifted slightly under her feet, as if the boards were settling into her shape, welcoming her back. Then the dark cracked. A small light appeared to her right. Soft, flickering, the faint golden flutter of flame. She turned toward it. A lantern, just sitting there, on the floor. She approached it cautiously. It was old-fashioned, iron frame, with smoked glass and a brass handle. The flame inside burned low and steady. But what caught her breath was not the light. It was a shadow. The lantern didn't cast one. Instead, it absorbed them. Wherever the light should have touched, it drew darkness instead, like ink spiraling into water. The corners around the lantern grew deeper, not brighter. Shapes inside them swam briefly, only to vanish again. The light reversed the room, unlit what it touched. Harriet knelt. There was a note tied to the handle. Only what had been forgotten may be carried forward. She lifted the lantern. It was heavier than it should have been. The weight of history, maybe, or names, or memories. As she stood, its glow moved with her, but it didn't reveal the attic. It erased it. The cots disappeared. The walls softened. The ceiling receded. And then the attic was gone. She stood now in a hallway she hadn't seen before, narrower than the others. The floorboards warping inward as though they had grown tired of holding weight. No sconces, no paintings, no mirrors, just door after door, each identical, each labeled not with number but with a name. Her name. Every door read Harriet E. Cole. Some had middle initials scratched out and replaced. One had no E at all. She walked slowly, the lantern dulling the world around her with every step. Each door she passed drew more of the hallway into silence. She began to wonder if this was what dying felt like. Not falling or rising, but removing, subtracting, quieting. She stopped at one door that stood slightly ajar. Harriet pushed it open. Inside was a bedroom, familiar in the deepest way. Hers, from when she was very small. Not a recreation. The room, the chip dresser, the water stain on the ceiling in the shape of a fish. The quilt her grandmother made, stitched with irregular moons. The desk covered in old stickers. It even smelled right. That faint mix of old books, warm, and a trace of burned sugar from the time she'd left a candle burning too long on her windowsill. But she didn't go in, because someone was already there, sitting on the floor, cross-legged, back turned to her. Another version of herself. Not child Harriet, not old Harriet. This was the in-between. The years she never thought about. The quiet years. The forgotten years. This version was writing in a journal, murmuring softly under her breath. She didn't turn around, but she spoke. You can only leave when you found what you lost. Harriet stepped forward. Her boots didn't make a sound. The lantern in her hand flickered. What did I lose? She asked. The girl on the floor stopped writing. Then, slowly she pointed, not at the room, not at the journal, but at Harriet. You forgot why you came here. And then she vanished. No sound, no movement. One moment there, the next gone. Harriet dropped to her knees. The journal remained. She opened it. Every page was blank, except the last. On it, in the same neat writing from the book in the sitting room, were 3 lines. You saw the house long before you arrived. You dreamed of the fog first. You came to remember the door. She touched the page. It was warm, the lantern pulsed in her hand. Once, then again. And when she looked up, the door across the hallway had opened. It led not to a room, but to the woods. The same woods she had driven through, the ones lost in fog. Except there was no fog now. The trees were tall and silent, their trunks pale as bone. The path through them was worn, clear by feet that had passed this way many times before. She stepped through. The air was cold, real. The ground was soft with pine needles and loam. She looked behind her. The house was still there, elder hollow. The windows watched her. The chimney exhaled a thin line of gray. The lantern in her hand dimmed, and as she turned to walk the path into the woods, her shadow began to stretch before her, longer than it should be, shifting ever so slightly. Following her, or leading, the path through the woods was narrow and old, older than the house, older than the fog. It was worn not by use, but by memory. Each step Harriet took stirred echoes, soft and brittle, like dry leaves crumbling underfoot. The lantern she carried barely illuminated more than a few feet in front of her, but she didn't need to see far. She had the sense the path was not winding but folding, like paper creased and recreased until it remembered only one shape. The trees were close-set, tall, pale as if bleached by moonlight. Their branches did not move. There was no wind, no bird song, not even the crackle of distant undergrowth. Just her footsteps and breath, and the soft drag of the house in her mind. It wasn't behind her anymore. Not really. Not in a place that could be pointed to. But she still felt it. Watching. Not malevolently. Not kindly either. Just present. The way a sealed letter is present. The way a locked drawer is. She walked. Time stretched. It did not pass. It hovered. And soon she began to notice something was wrong. Not frightening. Just wrong. The path looped. Not sharply, not obviously, but subtly, like a hesitation in a song you've heard too many times. Or the repetition of a single word that shouldn't stand out, but suddenly does. She saw the same knot in the same tree 3 times. A curl of bark that resembled a fishhook. A stone with a pale lichen that looked like a single closed eye. The trees weren't changing. She stopped. The lantern dimmed in her hand. It no longer pushed the darkness away. It let it settle, gentle as a blanket. The path ahead shimmered faintly now, like heat over pavement, though the air was cold. She turned back. The way she'd come was gone. Not blocked, not hidden, just not there. The woods behind her were solid now, trunks where there had once been trail. She was inside a loop, not just a physical one, a memory, something between forgetting and almost remembering. She turned again, and the trees parted, just slightly. A clearing she hadn't seen before. And at its center, a bench, a single wooden bench, half sunk in moss, weathered but upright. Beside it, a post driven into the earth, and on that post, a metal bell, small, copper, the kind that might hang outside a door in a quiet shop. Beneath it, a sign, ring to be reminded. Harriet hesitated. The lantern in her hand gave one final flicker and died. She set it down beside the bench. Its light would no longer help her here. She sat. The bench creaked, once long and low, and she exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Her knees ached. Her scarf was damp with fog she hadn't noticed returning. Her hands were trembling. She reached for the bell. The metal was cold and oily to the touch, as though it had been rung 1,000 times in storms no one remembered. She rang it. The sound was soft, higher than she expected, like glass chiming underwater. It didn't echo. It didn't travel. It sank, as though the bell swallowed its own voice. And then she remembered. Not everything, just enough. She had come here before, not in a dream, not as a child, but as someone older, wounded, desperate. She had seen the fog and recognized it. She had followed the path to the house not because it was unknown, but because it was the only place she had ever truly belonged. This was not her first arrival. It was her return. She stood. The clearing had changed. Where once were trees, now stood doors. Dozens of them, freestanding like gravestones, set in a wide circle around the bench. Each was unique. Some metal, some wood, some old, some new, but all bore her name. All except one. That one was blank. The knob was bone white. Its hinges were stitched with thread. And as she approached it, she could hear something behind it. A soft rustle, like pages turning. A voice murmuring, the cadence familiar. Her voice, reading. She touched the door. It was warm. She opened it and stepped into a room made of books. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling in every direction, towering and curving and intersecting like the inside of a cathedral built entirely of stories. The air was thick with dust and whispers. Pages turned themselves. Spines creaked as if exhaling. Somewhere above, a massive pendulum swung, slow, deliberate, marking time in seconds that didn't match the ones inside her chest. And at the center of it all sat a desk. The same desk from the study. And behind it herself, Harriet, writing, but not looking up. She was older again, not ancient, not dying, just full, as though she had held too much for too long. The pen in her hand scratched steadily across parchment. Harriet stepped forward. The older self did not flinch or pause, but she did speak. "You're doing better this time," she said softly. Harriet swallowed. "What is this place?" The woman looked up, and her eyes were calm, deep, not kind, not cruel, just certain. "This is where we keep the versions that didn't wake up." Harriet looked around. The books, each one had her name. Date, some burned, some unfinished, some locked with brass clasps. She touched one. The leather cover flinched beneath her hand. "You didn't survive the crash the first time," the older Harriet said. "You made it to the house, but you never reached the attic. Another time, you stayed in room 12 too long. Another, you climbed into the mirror and never found the staircase again." Harriet stared. "You're saying I've died?" The older Harriet smiled faintly. "You tried." She gestured to the shelves. "Every time you return, the house tests you, reminds you, decides if you're ready to leave." "Leave where?" But the woman only looked past her, to the door still hanging open, to the forest now gone quiet. And behind her, Harriet could hear it again. The music box, faint, playing backwards. The music box played backwards, each note unraveling like thread, peeling memory from marrow. Harriet didn't move. She stood between shelves of herself. Versions shelved like histories, like warnings, listening as the tune wound down into something unrecognizable. Behind the desk, the older Harriet, the archivist, she supposed, watched you with patient, sorrowful eyes. "You have to choose," the archivist said. Harriet turned to her. "Choose what?" The archivist gestured toward the shelves. "Which version of yourself you want to leave behind?" Harriet felt a coldness rise in her throat. "Why would I do that?" "You can't walk out whole," the archivist replied. "No one does. The house doesn't let you. You want to remember? But memory takes space. It takes room. Something has to stay." Harriet looked again at the shelves. Some books trembled faintly. Some sat still and lifeless. One of them, small, bound in green velvet, seemed to breathe. The archivist stood and crossed the room, trailing her fingers along the spines. "This one," she said softly, resting her hand on a black leather volume with a broken clasp. "This was the version who tried to fix everything. She stayed too long, forgot her name. She wandered the service halls of the house for what felt like centuries." Harriet looked closer. The spine read, "H. E. code, attempt 19 reflection loop." She opened it slowly. The pages were smeared with charcoal sketches, hands reaching for mirrors, a narrow bed, a fox with no eyes, words scrawled between the drawings, repeating ones. I'm still here. I'm still here. I'm still here. Harriet closed the book. What happens to the ones I leave behind? She asked. They sleep, the archivist said. Mostly. And if I leave the wrong one? The archivist smiled. But it didn't reach her eyes. Then next time, the house builds new doors. Harriet felt something shift behind her. The open door she had entered through, the blank one, was no longer empty. It was filling with fog again. And inside it, she could see the faint glow of the lantern she had set down, now burning brighter than before. I don't want to forget, Harriet said quietly. You won't, the archivist replied. You'll just misplace the shape of it, like a dream remembered in the wrong order. Harriet moved down the aisle. She passed attempt 70. Stayed too long in the room with the clock. Attempt 12. Opened the music box twice. Attempt 23. Didn't follow the whisper. Some shelves were bare. Some were overfull, spilling with pages that drifted on the floor like brittle leaves. Then she saw it. Her own face. On the cover, a mirror set into the binding. Her eyes were shut. The label read, Attempt 27. Arrival fully remembered. She touched the cover. The eyes in the mirror opened. Just a flicker. Enough. She lifted the book. It was heavier than the others. She looked back at the archivist. This one. The archivist tilted her head. Are you certain? Harriet nodded, then put it on the table. She did, and the moment it touched the wood, the house sighed. She felt it ripple through the boards, through the spines of the shelves, through the very breadth of the attic and the cellar and the hall with no corners, like the house had been waiting, not for her to find it, but to choose. The archivist stepped back behind the desk and picked up the book. I'll keep it, she said. Then she opened it and began to read. The shelves began to fade. One by one, the versions of herself vanished. Shelved lives closed gently, smoke dissolving into the seams of the house. Harriet turned. The fog at the doorway was thicker now, but soft, warm. It no longer pressed against her. It welcomed her, opening like a curtain. She stepped through. The forest was gone. She stood now at the edge of a long hallway, lit by steady sconces. A single carpet stretched down the center, red and gold and deeply patterned, like veins beneath thin skin. And at the far end, a door. The door. It looked unremarkable. Flat, wooden, brass knob. But she knew it. It had been waiting in dreams she never recalled upon waking. The house held its breath. She walked forward. Each step grew lighter. Not easier, but familiar. She had walked this path before. At the door, she paused. She turned back. Behind her was only fog. Not thick, not suffocating. Just there, like a memory waiting to return. She reached for the doorknob. It was warm, alive. She turned it, and the world behind the door was not what she expected. It was a room, a simple one. Bed, window, wooden floor. Early morning light spilled through sheer curtains. Bird song drifted in real, crisp bright. Outside, a street she knew. Parked cars, telephone wires, the scent of damp pavement. Her apartment. Harriet stepped in. The door closed behind her. There was no click, no lock, just quiet. She stood for a long time. The house didn't follow her. Not exactly. But she knew it was still beneath things. Beneath names, beneath rooms, beneath memory. Waiting. Somewhere. Everywhere. She took off her scarf and set it on the chair. Then walked to the window and looked out. And for the first time in many, many loops, she felt the morning. Real and unbroken. And behind her, somewhere very deep in the folds of the house at Elder Hollow, the music box finally stopped, and the last echo of the house whispered, now she remembers. Harriet did not return to her old life. Not really. The morning came. The sunlight was bright. The kettle worked. Her shoes sat where she left them. But something had shifted. It wasn't dramatic. Not at first. The air in her apartment felt unfamiliar, as though the walls had been quietly rearranged while she slept. Her keys no longer sat where she remembered placing them. The books on her shelves had the right titles, the right where, but the pages inside had changed. Tiny shifts, lines she could have sworn weren't there before, words reordered, a sense of something beneath the story. The world outside the window seemed as it had always been. Buses signed to stop, people with umbrellas walking too quickly, the soft, dull hush of morning traffic. But the fog had returned, not the way it had blanketed the woods. This was thinner, lingering, only visible out of the corner of the eye, only when she wasn't looking directly at it. She told no one. She didn't speak of the house. She didn't speak of the versions on the shelves. Not because she feared being thought mad, but because she knew the truth would not stay still. It would rewrite itself as she said it, and the house would hear. Weeks passed, maybe longer. She worked when she could, slept little, ate less. Her dreams folded on themselves, mirrors of mirrors, rooms without light. Then, one night, the knock came. 3 soft taps on her apartment door. Not forceful, not urgent, just patient. Harriet sat on the couch, motionless. The television hummed static. The kettle hissed, faintly from the stove. The knock came again. When she opened the door, no one stood in the hallway. Only a letter, cream envelope, wax sealed, a familiar sigil stamped into the wax. A key curled like a question mark. She opened it. There was no writing inside, only a map, drawn by hand, in dark red ink that shimmered slightly beneath the overhead light. It was a map of a building, not quite a house, not quite a hospital. Corridors bent in wrong angles. Some hallways ended in nothing, others folded back into themselves. One stairwell climbed and descended at once. At the center, a room. It was unmarked, unnumbered, no door drawn to it. No path, just a single phrase written beneath it, in her own handwriting. You forgot what you agreed to. Harriet stared at it for a long time. Then, without packing, without changing her shoes, she left the apartment. The fog followed. It always had. The address wasn't listed. She didn't need it. The city bent to her now in ways it never had. Alleys opened that weren't there yesterday. A bookstore's back door led into a hotel lobby she'd never seen. Beneath a rusted overpass, a narrow path opened into an abandoned tram tunnel lined with old wallpaper and candle stubs. The map guided her, not in straight lines, but in intuition. She knew where to go, even if the streets didn't agree. She found herself at the threshold of a building she couldn't name. It had no sign, no mailbox, no doorbell, just a black door, like all doors before it. Inside, the hallway was dark and narrow. The floor slanted downward, just slightly, just enough that her body adjusted without realizing. Lights flickered, bare bulbs and metal cages. The wallpaper here was peeling, gray-green, stained in places with old water damage and shapes that might have been handprints. She passed rooms with glass windows, offices maybe, but no light inside them, no movement. Then a turn, then another. The map in her pocket grew warm. And finally, the door. It wasn't like the others. Not rotten, not ancient, but untouched. Flat, gray-blue, no knob, just a small slot in the center, the kind you might find in a suggestion box. Below it, a plaque. Insert your name to enter. She paused. There was no pen, no paper, but she didn't need either. She reached into her coat pocket, and there it was, folded tightly, old and yellow, a page torn from the ledger in elder hollow. She fed it into the slot. The door opened. The room inside was small, not wide, not tall, but it stretched inward, the way deep thoughts do. The walls were covered in picture frames, hundreds, maybe thousands, all sizes, all styles, gilded, wooden, bent metal, broken glass, but no pictures, only mirrors. Each frame held a pane of mirrored glass, some fogged, some clean, all silent, and in each a version of her, some younger, some older, some asleep, some screaming, some turning away just as she looked in. One reached out, touched the glass, then another, and another. Soon, they were all watching her. From every wall, her own image reflected 1,000 times in 1,000 different lives. And behind them, barely visible, stood the house. Not Elder Hollow exactly, but a new version. Changed, wider, waiting. She stepped forward, and the floor pulsed beneath her foot. The lights dimmed, and all at once, every mirror cracked. Not shattered, cracked. A single line down the center of each, like an eye opening vertically, and a voice whispered, "You said you would stay this time." Harriet stood very still and said nothing. There was no one to lie to. Not here. Only the house and the agreement she had made. One she still did not remember. When the mirrors cracked, they didn't fall. They didn't splinter or collapse to dust. They remained hanging, suspended in their frames like hell breath. Hairline fractures running through every version of her, like scars no one ever saw. And behind each image, the house loomed larger. Not the house she had entered that first time. Not Elder Hollow exactly, but a more complete version, as if every fragment, every forgotten path, every door she hadn't opened had been gathered and stitched into something fuller, something that could finally begin to speak. She turned from the mirrors. There was only one door in the room now, not the one she entered from. That one had vanished, folded into the wall, like it had never been there. This new door was black, not painted, just black, like oil that refused to dry. No knob, no handle, just her name scratched across it in a child's handwriting. Harriet echoed. She touched it. The surface rippled. Then it dissolved. Behind the door, stairs again. Of course, always stairs. But these didn't descend in the usual way. They wound downward in an impossible spiral. Flat steps suspended in a vertical column. No railing, no walls, just a sense of pressure, like walking down inside a throat that never stopped swallowing. She began to walk. Down, down. The light grew stranger. Not darker, just wrong. Colors that didn't correspond to names. Warmth and cold changing every few steps. Her breath fogged in some turns, vanished in others. After a long time, she saw the bottom, and there it waited. A door made of stone. Wide, arched. No light behind it. Only a subtle hum, like something vast and deep dreaming beneath water, carved above the arch. The room beneath the room, where names no longer mattered. She touched the stone. It parted like curtain cloth. And inside, she found herself standing in a room that didn't obey shape. It was vast and tight at once. The floor was tiled with memory. Photographs pressed beneath lacquered glass. Things she hadn't seen in years. Her grandmother's staircase. The coffee mug she dropped at 17. The blood stain on the hospital curtain. The walls breathed, not visibly but palpably, like the air turned to velvet and shifted with her every motion. And at the center, a table, round, black, lit by a single candle that burned without flame. 3 chairs, one empty, one broken, and one already occupied. The figure sitting there wore no face. Not hidden, not masked, just absent, a shape in clothes, a silhouette of a person, a shadow that cast no shadow. But Harriet knew it, by the ache it summoned in her chest, by the way her skin pulled tight against her spine. It was the part of herself she had locked away, the moment she decided to forget, the self who had agreed to come back. She sat in the empty chair. The broken one fell backward soundlessly and disappeared. The faceless one spoke, not aloud, but inside her. "Do you understand now?" Harriet nodded, not because she knew the full truth, but because she finally accepted she never would. Not here, not with words, not with mirrors, only by choosing. The candle flared blue, and the table shifted. Now a map, not of the house, not of the forest, but of her life, drawn in spidery lines, points connected in rhythms she didn't recognize, birthdays, losses, apartments, hours of sleep wasted, books not finished, hands not held. She reached out and touched a single node, a night when she was 24. The night. She had almost walked into the sea. The map pulsed, and the faceless figure said, "This was when you first heard the house calling." She touched another. The morning after her father's funeral. A crack appeared in the tile below her feet, a soft, widening breath of something old. Harriet looked up. The ceiling was gone. Above them, stars. But not like any stars she'd seen. These were moving, shifting slowly, like paper lanterns adrift in deep water. Each was a door. Each flickered. Some dimmed. Some winked out as she watched. "You have time," said the faceless one. "But not forever." Harriet leaned forward. "What did I agree to?" Silence. Then the softest, saddest voice replied, "To trade forgetting for passage. To return again and again until you carried yourself home." Harriet looked down at the map, at the flickering thread of her existence. So many false starts. So many dead ends. So many rooms. She took the candle in both hands. It did not burn, but it sank into her palms. Warm, weightless. She stood. The faceless figure stood too, its shape folded into hers. Not violently, not entirely, just enough to carry the memory, to leave behind the burden. The table vanished. The stars above dimmed. And Harriet found herself again at the top of the staircase. A door before her. One last door, painted with her reflection. Not a name, not a number, just her face. Oh, uncracked, eyes open. She reached for the handle, and for the first time since entering the house, since returning, she smiled. Not in joy, not in relief, but in knowing, and stepped through. The door closed behind her with no sound. No latch, no lock, only the hush of finality. The room beyond was not a hallway, not an attic, not a memory made solid. It was the house itself, unclothed, stripped of illusion, no wallpaper, no mirrors, no numbered doors, just raw beams, aged floorboards, a ceiling low enough to graze the scalp as she walked too tall. The house inhaled gently and the walls flexed, not physically, not in any measurable way, but Harriet felt it, as if the space between matter had thinned, and now the very bones in place were stretching to accommodate her one last time. This was where the house lived, not in space. In awareness, it had brought her here, because she had earned it, because she had come back enough times, peeled away enough versions, made enough sacrifices, remembered enough of herself. It was listening now. She heard the creak of floorboard behind her. Bare, soft, weightless. She turned. A child stood in the doorway, no older than 10. Pale hands, a too large sweater, the same green eyes. Her, the earliest her, the one who had first dreamed of Elder Hollow. "Why did you call me?" Harriet asked. The girl blinked slowly like an owl. "Because you stopped asking questions." "I was afraid." "I know. And now," the child smiled gently, "now you're ready." "Ready for what?" The child raised a hand, not pointing at Harriet, but at the room around her, the walls, the beams, the breath of it, to remember what you built. Harriet's chest tightened. The floorboards here were laid in the same crooked pattern as her grandmother's parlor. The beam in the ceiling had the exact notch her father carved when he measured her height each birthday. The air smelled faintly of the lilac her mother used to keep on the porch. This wasn't just the house. It was her house, made from memory, from pain, from the rooms she had buried. She was never a guest. She was the architect. "You made it," the child whispered. "All of it. The doors, the fog, the shelves, even the other cells." Harriet sank slowly to the floor. It was soft beneath her now. Carpet? No, moss. The kind that grows beneath ancient trees, silent and lush. The house no longer hid its shape. She sat in the center of it, palms flat to the earth. She felt the weight of it above her. The calm breath was around her, and the question finally came. Not aloud, not spoken, but heavy and true. "Will you stay?" She looked at the child. She was fading, already blending into the wood grain, becoming a knot in the doorframe, a memory no longer needed. Harriet stood. Her shadow didn't follow her now. It walked beside her, a twin, a version, a friend. She reached the far end of the room. A mirror stood there, not framed, not hung, just present. A surface of still water caught in a rectangle of dark wood. She stepped closer. Her reflection was clear now, no distortion, No warping. She looked tired. Yes, but whole. The mirror pulsed once, and then split open. Behind it, a field, wide, wind stirred. The sky above it thick with stars, but not distant stars. Low ones, closed, moving. She stepped through. Her feet touched grass. Wet with dew. She turned once to look back, but the house was gone. Only the scent of it remained. Ash, lavender, fox fur, old paper, and that soft, impossible melody. The one that had no beginning and no end. It hummed through her bones now. A lullaby not for children, but for selves. Selves that had wandered too long. Selves that had finally come home. Harriet sat down in the field. The grass bent beneath her, and all at once, she was tired in a way she had never known. Not a sadness, not a loss, just an invitation to rest. The stars dipped lower, the field sighed, and somewhere far beneath her, she could feel the house settling, its spine curling in on itself, its eyes closing. She lay back, looked up, let it all blur, and as her eyes grew heavy, the fog came once more. But this time, it did not take her. It tucked her in. The field drifted, not in motion, but in sense, in purpose. The grass beneath Harriet remained, and the stars above spun slowly in their wheel. But the world had turned to hush, to breath, to weightlessness, a place between heartbeats, between thoughts. It did not feel like sleep. It felt like remembering. The kind of remembering that doesn't involve facts or names, but textures, smells, impressions etched so deep into the soul, they survive forgetting. She sat up slowly. The grass whispered against her arms. The sky had changed while she rested. There was now a shape in it. Not a cloud, not a star, but a structure, suspended, far above but unmistakably real. A house, built from light and outline, its roof sloping into the distance, too large to be seen in full. Its windows glowed softly. Its chimneys let out tiny trails of silver mist. It did not cast a shadow, but Harriet knew it watched. It was the house behind the house. The first house, the one that had dreamed Elder Hollow into existence. She stood, the air shimmered, and in front of her, without warning, there appeared a gate, black wrought iron, delicate, almost skeletal, no fence on either side, just a gate alone, suspended between one breath and the next. Attached to it, a book, not a door, not a test, just a book, bound in pale leather, warm to the touch. She opened it. Inside names, thousands of them, written in all styles, all scripts, some scratched in haste, some lovingly inscribed, some just a fingerprint, others a single press leaf. She flipped through slowly. Each page hummed, not sound, resonance. Like hearing someone speak a language you once knew in a childhood long since erased. And then, her own name, not written, waiting, a blank line on a blank page. Below it, an old brass pen. It had no ink, but Harriet knew it would write all the same. She hesitated, not out of fear, but out of reverence, because this was not the guest book of a house. It was the archive of the in-between. The registry of those who had entered and remembered and earned their place, those who had circled the hall with no corners, those who had walked the path that looped and never turned back, those who had heard their voice inside another version of themselves and answered. Harriet took the pen and wrote, not just her name, but her intention, a sentence she hadn't realized she'd been carrying since the beginning. I will not forget again. The pen pulsed in her hand. The book closed softly. The gate opened. She stepped through, and on the other side, there was no path, only fog, but not the suffocating kind. This fog carried the scent of rain on stone, of warm wool, of candle smoke curling in the corner of a room where someone once waited for her return. And then a sound, so faint she thought it might be imagined, but it came again, and again, the sound of pages turning. Not fast, not searching, just passing time. She walked toward it. The fog pulled back as she moved, and soon she saw it, a small cabin, nestled in a fold of the field. built of mismatched stone and dark beams. No sign, no address, only an open door and a thin trail of smoke from the chimney. She stepped inside. It was empty. One room, a stove, a chair, a narrow cot, and a desk. Not the grand desk from the study, not the ornate desk of the archivist, just a work desk, well-worn, and on it, a book, open, still being written. Even now, the pen moved by itself, inscribing line after line in a steady, elegant hand. She approached. Read. Harriet E. Cole returned to the house for the final time, not because she was lost, but because she was finally ready to be found. The pen paused, then dipped back into its inkwell, waited. She sat at the desk. The chair welcomed her, like it remembered her weight. Outside, the fog held its distance. Patient, unmoving, she took up the pen, turned the page. It was blank, but not empty. The lines were invisible until she touched them. Then they bloomed beneath her hand. She began to write. Not a story, not a memory, but a message to the next guest, to the one who had arrived tired, half-faded, uncertain. She did not know who they would be, but she knew they would come. The house always called. The house always waited. She wrote, "The first door never looks like a door, but when you touch it, you'll know." The fire crackled gently behind her. She turned to look at the cot. It looked warm. The fog had thickened again outside. She set the pen down, rose, crossed the room, and as she lay down for the first real sleep in all her remembered lives, she whispered into the wood of the house, "You can rest now, too." And the house did. All of it. There was no morning in the cabin. No clock. No sky. Only a gentle, endless gray light that hung without a source, as though time had taken off its boots and was politely waiting at the threshold. Harriet didn't wake so much as arrive. Eyes open, breath steady. No heartbeat pounding in her ears. No dream fading from her fingertips. Just presence. The cabin was still. The pages on the desk lay closed, her words tucked beneath the leather cover, humming faintly, like a lantern covered in a soft cloth. A message now, for someone who had not yet begun to wonder what they had lost. For the next to come, for the next to return. Harriet stood. Her body was not sore. She didn't feel younger or older. She felt herself, as if all the other Harriets had at last nested within her like foxes in a long-forgotten attic. Their voices were quiet now. Their screams had softened. Their questions finally answered. She stepped to the door. The fog had thinned again, and in the distance, across the field, there stood a single figure, waiting, not approaching, not waving, just standing. Harriet walked to them. Each step pressed the grass flat and left no trace. The wind had stopped pretending to move. As she neared, she saw the figure wore a face. Not precisely. It was not another version, not an echo. This was possibility. Harriet understood immediately. This was a life she would have lived if she had never found the house, if the fog had never called her, if the dreams had stayed dreams. She stared at the woman. The woman stared back. They said nothing, because there was nothing to argue. One life full of missing pieces, another full of haunted rooms, one built in the light of what could have been, the other built in the dark, where truth waited uninvited. Harriet reached out. The woman stepped forward. Their palms touched. No spark, no tremor, just emerging. A reconciliation. The road not taken. Folded back into the road walked blind, and the field bowed around them like a curtain. The cabin was gone now. So was the map. So was the gate, the mirrors, the archivist, even the house. All of it had folded in, pulled inward, not erased, archived. A final hallway stretched before her now. No doors, just a gentle incline. No light fixtures, but it was not dark. The walls pulsed faintly, alive with veins of memory. Faint outlines of rooms she had passed through. The corridor she had whispered in. The seam of a stairwell she had once fallen down in a dream at 15. She walked slowly. Her footsteps didn't echo. They were absorbed. Halfway down the hall, she passed a chair. Empty. upholstered in soft red velvet. Facing the wall, she paused, touched it, still warm. Someone had been here just moments before. She kept walking. Further on, another chair, and another, and then dozens, hundreds, lining the walls, all empty, all recently used. Some still carried the scent of those who sat in them. Some had names etched into the wood. Some had initials only she recognized because they were hers. Versions, attempts, failures, and near successes. And at the end of the hallway, a window, square, simple. A breeze passed through it, not cold, not warm, but right. Harriet stepped forward and looked through, and on the other side, a train platform, empty, a single wooden bench, and beside it, a conductor, not quite human, not quite machine, wrapped in a uniform stitched from night and threadbare time. They nodded to her once. She turned the handle on the window. It opened. No barrier, no demand, only a question, spoken by the wind itself. Bored, she stepped through the frame and onto the platform. The train was already waiting, not visible until she touched the platform, and then it shimmered into focus. Long and low, made of midnight blue steel and soft yellow lamps. The windows glowed gently, but nothing inside moved. The conductor raised a hand. No ticket required. Only choice. Only intent. Harriet nodded once. Boarded. The door closed behind her. The car smelled of pine needles and old leather, and the final chapter of a very old book. She sat by a window. There were no other passengers. No one needed to be here anymore. Only her. Only this. The train began to move. No engine. No whistle. It simply knew. The fog returned. Not to trap. Not to confuse. But to cradle. It curled around the train as it passed out of this place. Into whatever lay after houses that watch, and mirrors that remember, and halls that loop through regret. She closed her eyes. And this time there was no dream. No music box. No whisper returning. Just breath. And the sound of the tracks. Soft. Steady. Final. And somewhere far behind her, where the fields met the last breath of the house, the last light dimmed, and the house at Elder Hollow, full at last, folded itself inward and slept forever.